The night of May 10, 1945, began with an unnatural stillness. The entire village of Tamari was shrouded in darkness, its residents crouched in hidden corners, barely daring to breathe. For days, rumors had swept through the area. American troops were advancing, and with them came all the terrors the villagers had been taught to fear. Mothers pressed their children close, whispering last prayers, while fathers clutched heirlooms that seemed suddenly fragile and useless in the face of war. For young Hiro, just 6 years old, these warnings were more confusing than terrifying. He did not yet fully grasp the idea of enemies or the finality of loss. When the first artillery shell landed on the outskirts of the village, panic erupted like a wildfire. Families surged from their shelters, carrying what little they could, desperate to escape the crumbling houses and fires that now licked at their doorsteps. In the confusion, Hiro lost his grip on his mother's sleeve. The mass of bodies surged and split apart, and in a single, irretrievable moment, he was swept away from everyone he knew. The world shrank to chaos. Screams, explosions, the sharp scent of smoke, and the thudding of his own heart. Hiro's small legs carried him blindly through alleys filled with rubble. He stumbled over broken wood and scattered belongings, calling for his mother until his voice turned hoarse. His world had changed in an instant, every familiar landmark reduced to unrecognizable ruins. Night fell quickly, and the darkness made everything worse. Without the reassuring presence of his family, fear overtook him completely. He found a collapsed doorway and crawled beneath it, shivering, unsure if he would ever see daylight or hear his mother's voice again. As the hours dragged by, the sounds of battle faded into the distance. The only noises were Hiro's ragged breaths and the distant barking of a dog. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but fear kept him from moving. Each unfamiliar sound, a creak, a whistle of wind, a distant shout, made him curl up tighter, convinced that something monstrous lurked outside. He clung to a cracked wooden toy he'd managed to keep in his pocket, the last piece of a world that had suddenly vanished. In the bleak, silent hours before dawn, Hiro drifted in and out of uneasy sleep. He dreamed of his mother's face, of warmth and safety, only to jolt awake each time, cold and disoriented. The loneliness pressed on him with a physical weight. The notion of time disappeared. All that remained was waiting, hoping, and the constant ache of fear and longing. By morning, Hiro's throat was dry from crying. He peered out from his hiding place, half expecting the world to have changed back to normal. Instead, he saw more devastation: charred trees, shattered windows, and empty, ghostly streets. There was no sign of his family or anyone he knew. For a long time, he did not move, paralyzed by uncertainty. The silence seemed endless, but at last, necessity drove him out into the open, searching for food, water, or perhaps a friendly face. Cautiously, he made his way through the ruins, every sound magnified by his exhaustion and fear. A distant voice, a low, unfamiliar tone, made him freeze in place. It was not the voice of any villager or Japanese soldier he recognized. Hiro pressed himself behind a heap of stones, his small body trembling as the footsteps drew closer. For the first time, he wondered if the stories he had heard about American soldiers were true. Minutes passed that felt like hours. When he finally peeked out, he saw a tall, broad-shouldered figure moving through the debris with deliberate care. The man wore a strange, mottled uniform and carried a bag slung over one shoulder. His face was dirty and tired, but there was something cautious, almost gentle in the way he moved. Hiro's instinct was to hide, But his hunger and exhaustion betrayed him. He shifted, sending a small rock tumbling down the pile. The sound caught the man's attention. He stopped, scanned the rubble, and called out softly in English, a language Hiro did not understand, but which sounded different from anything he'd heard before. For a moment, both stood frozen, studying each other in the broken morning light. And so, on the edge of everything he had ever known, Hiro met the man who would become his unlikely guardian. Sergeant Jonathan Bailey was not a typical soldier. Though he wore the uniform and carried a rifle, his main purpose in the army was to heal, not to harm. The chaos of Okinawa weighed heavily on him, and each ruined village only added to the burden. When he first entered Tomari with his squad, Bailey felt the tension in the air, an unspoken warning that these people feared him far more than he could possibly fear them. He moved carefully through the debris, eyes scanning for survivors, mind racing with questions he could never ask. The morning sun revealed the devastation in sharp detail. Smoke drifted through shattered beams, and the acrid smell of burnt rice and gunpowder lingered everywhere. Bailey's squad was tasked with securing the area, but his instincts pulled him toward the quieter corners, places where frightened souls might be hiding. When he heard a faint scuffling sound behind a pile of stones, he signaled his men to hold back. He advanced alone, weapon lowered, hoping to ease whatever terror might be lurking there. Peering behind the rocks, he caught sight of a small boy, filthy and trembling, clutching a battered wooden toy. The child's eyes were wide with exhaustion and mistrust. For a moment neither moved, one frozen by fear, the other by the enormity of what war had done to this place. Bailey remembered his own younger brother back home and felt a pang of helplessness. He knelt down, placing his rifle carefully on the ground, and offered a canteen of water, making sure his movements were slow and non-threatening. The boy, Hiro, hesitated before reaching for the water, his small hands shaking. Bailey spoke softly, though he knew the words were meaningless to the child. Still, the tone of his voice and the gentle expression on his face communicated enough. Hiro drank greedily, water dribbling down his chin. It was the first act of trust in a world where trust had been shattered. Bailey wiped the boy's face with a rag and tried to offer a reassuring smile. Sensing that Hiro was alone, Bailey quickly realized the dangers that still surrounded them. Sporadic gunfire echoed in the distance, and the threat of renewed shelling was ever present. He signaled Hiro to stay close and led him back to a makeshift shelter behind a collapsed wall, all the while keeping an eye out for both Japanese snipers and suspicious glances from his own squad. Protecting a Japanese child was not part of any army protocol, but Bailey's conscience left him no other choice. Inside the cramped shelter, Bailey searched his pack for food. He tore a piece of hardtack and handed it to Hiro, watching as the boy ate with desperate hunger. The child's silence was not just from fear, but also from exhaustion and confusion. Bailey wished he could promise safety or explain what had happened, but the language barrier was impenetrable. Instead, he simply sat beside Hiro, offering quiet company in the middle of devastation. Over the next hours, Bailey kept a careful watch. Once, a group of American soldiers passed nearby, joking loudly and tossing debris aside in their search for supplies. Bailey instinctively shielded Hiro from view, not knowing how his fellow soldiers would react to finding him sheltering a Japanese child. He was torn between duty and compassion, but every glance at the boy's haunted face reaffirmed his decision. Hiro, though still wary, began to relax slightly in Bailey's presence. He watched the soldier with cautious curiosity, mimicking his movements when he drank or shifted his position. Bailey tried to make him laugh, making silly faces or gently tapping out a rhythm on a tin cup. Sometimes, Hiro's lips would curl in a shy, uncertain smile, a small victory in a world where happiness seemed impossible. As dusk approached, Bailey prepared their hiding place for another uncertain night.
He wrapped Hero in a spare blanket and tucked him into the corner, listening for the distant rumble of artillery. He wondered how long he could protect the boy, what dangers the coming days might bring, and if he would ever be able to reunite Hero with his family. In the growing darkness, he made a silent promise to keep the child safe, no matter the cost. The days that followed were a blur of tension and exhaustion, marked by the constant threat of violence and the uneasy alliance between child and soldier. Sergeant Bailey rationed his limited supplies, dividing every canteen of water and morsel of food with Hero. They remained mostly hidden, venturing out only when it was necessary to avoid patrols or scavenge for essentials among the shattered remains of homes. Bailey moved with calculated caution, always keeping himself between the boy and any source of danger. Hero grew accustomed to Bailey's presence, though he remained quiet, his trust hard-won and fragile. Sometimes he would study the soldier with wide, searching eyes, trying to understand his intentions. Bailey tried to bridge the gulf of language with gestures and gentle tones, offering comfort as best he could. He bandaged the boy's wounds with strips of cloth, wincing at each bruise and scratch, and tried to keep Hero warm at night despite the damp, cold air. The world outside their makeshift refuge remained hostile. The sounds of distant skirmishes never truly faded. Bursts of gunfire, the boom of artillery, the shouting of orders in English and Japanese alike. Sometimes the ground itself shook, sending dust raining down from the broken beams above. Each time this happened, Hero would shrink into himself, clutching his battered toy and pressing close to Bailey's side, seeking safety in the only comfort left to him. Bailey's greatest fear was discovery, not just by Japanese troops, but by his own. He knew that harboring a Japanese child would be questioned, perhaps even punished by his superiors. Still, he refused to abandon Hero. He moved them from hiding place to hiding place as the front line shifted, relying on his experience and instinct to sense when it was time to go. Every move was fraught with risk, and every safe hour felt like a small miracle. On the rare occasions when the world outside grew briefly quiet, Bailey tried to provide moments of normalcy. He showed Hero how to whistle softly through his fingers, or played simple clapping games in the dim light. These were fleeting distractions, but they gave the boy a brief respite from his fear. Sometimes Hero would fall asleep against Bailey's side, his breathing slow and steady, and for a few precious minutes the war felt far away. As days slipped by, hunger and fatigue became their constant companions. Bailey gave Hero the lion's share of whatever food he could find, suppressing his own hunger for the boy's sake. He watched over Hero as if he were his own flesh and blood, determined to keep him alive no matter what. Each night, as darkness settled over the ruins, Bailey lay awake, running through plans and contingencies, searching for a way to reunite Hero with his family. Meanwhile, news of a lone American soldier seen with a Japanese child began to circulate among the villagers. Some whispered that it was a trick. Others wondered if the soldier had taken the boy hostage. Uncertainty bred rumors, and rumors fueled both hope and anxiety among those who had lost children during the chaos. Bailey remained oblivious to the growing search, focused entirely on the task of survival. On the fourth evening, the sky flared with another barrage of artillery, forcing Bailey and Hero to cower deeper into their shelter. The walls trembled, dust thickened the air, and Hero whimpered softly, clutching Bailey's sleeve. Bailey whispered nonsense words in English, desperate to soothe him, and the boy seemed to draw strength from his calmness. For that night at least, their fragile bond was enough to keep the darkness at bay. Bailey knew their luck could not last forever. Supplies were dwindling, and the front lines were shifting unpredictably as the fighting raged nearby. On the fifth day, their shelter was rocked by a blast that shattered what little protection they had left. Realizing it was no longer safe to stay hidden, Bailey made the difficult decision to move. He wrapped Hero in his jacket and quietly slipped out into the gray dawn, keeping low and silent as they crept through alleys and ruined courtyards. Every step through the devastated village was a risk. Bailey guided Hero with gentle touches, stopping often to listen for approaching soldiers or the distant thud of mortars. The boy followed with the trust of someone who had nothing else to cling to, his small hand always searching for the comfort of Bailey's grip. Together, they made their way toward an abandoned farmhouse that Bailey had scouted the night before, hoping it would provide shelter at least for a few hours. Inside the farmhouse, Bailey assessed their situation. There was no food, but the building was sturdy and offered a vantage point from which he could watch for patrols. He taught Hero how to stay quiet, using hand gestures and soft reassurances. The boy, now accustomed to Bailey's protective presence, responded with remarkable resilience, doing his best not to cry or panic even when shells exploded in the distance. Bailey watched him with a mixture of pride and sadness, knowing how much the child had already endured. The farmhouse soon became another temporary haven, but Bailey could not rest. He spent the daylight hours watching the horizon and planning possible escape routes, weighing the danger of moving against the risk of discovery. He worried about how much longer Hero could hold out. His cheeks were hollow from hunger, and his eyes flickered with fatigue. Bailey tried to distract him by whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a bird, offering it as a silent promise that they would see peace again. That afternoon, as a lull settled over the battlefield, Bailey heard voices nearby, American soldiers calling out in English, searching the ruins for wounded or survivors. Panic twisted in his stomach. He did not know how his comrades would react to finding him with a Japanese child. Some might help, but others would see Hero as an enemy or a liability. He weighed his options quickly, deciding that hiding was safer than risking an uncertain encounter. As the voices faded, Bailey comforted Hero with quiet words, stroking his hair and encouraging him to nap. For a few hours, the farmhouse was filled with uneasy peace. Bailey watched over Hero as he slept, torn between hope and fear. He wondered if the child's mother was still alive, searching these same ruins with her own heart full of dread. He wished desperately for a way to signal her, but any attempt to reach out risked both their lives. Toward evening, the sounds of battle surged again, forcing Bailey to keep Hero close by his side. He prepared a new hiding spot in the farmhouse cellar, spreading blankets on the dirt floor and making a nest of whatever scraps he could find. Hero pressed himself against Bailey, clutching the wooden bird and whispering a few words in Japanese that Bailey did not understand. The soldier wished he could answer, but all he could offer was presence and protection. As night fell, Bailey listened to the distant thunder of artillery, his mind racing with worry and exhaustion. He knew the coming days would demand even more from both of them, more courage, more endurance, and above all, more trust. But for now, in the flickering light of a single candle, he simply watched over the boy, determined not to let anything separate them again. Bailey's body ached from lack of sleep and the strain of constant vigilance. He knew their time in the farmhouse could not last much longer. Food was almost gone, and each day brought new dangers. Early that morning, he scouted the area, searching for any sign of help or safe passage. The battlefront seems to ebb and flow with no pattern, sometimes drawing dangerously close, other times fading into uneasy quiet. Hero remained by his side, his trust now absolute, though his face betrayed deep fatigue and hunger. The village around them had changed. Where once there were scattered survivors darting between ruins, now there were only shadows and the occasional echo of boots on stone. Bailey began to wonder if any civilians remained at all. He watched Hero play with the carved wooden bird and realized how thin the line was between hope and despair. Each time Hero smiled, even faintly, it reminded Bailey what he was fighting for: Not victory or orders, but the simple, irreplaceable value of a single life. By midday, distant shouts and gunfire signaled the arrival of another American patrol. Bailey hesitated, torn between revealing himself and risking Hero's safety. He weighed the possibility that, with the right explanation, his fellow soldiers might help reunite the boy with his family. But doubt gnawed at him, and he decided to wait, observing the patrol from the safety of their hiding place. The soldiers searched quickly and moved on, leaving the village emptier than before. Afternoon slipped into evening. Bailey noticed Hero growing weaker. The boy's movements slowed, and his head often drooped in exhaustion. Bailey shared the last of their food, forcing himself to eat nothing so Hero could have a few precious bites. In those moments, the soldier's resolve hardened. He would find a way to get Hero to safety, no matter the risk. He began to formulate a plan. If the next patrol returned, he would step out and plead for their understanding. That night, a storm rolled in, bringing cold rain that battered the ruined farmhouse. Bailey used every spare piece of fabric to keep Hero dry, holding him close through the worst of the weather. Hero shivered in his arms, but eventually drifted into fitful sleep, clutching the wooden bird. Bailey stared at the leaking roof, his mind restless with memories of his own family, wondering if Hero's mother was still out there searching in the rain. Sleep came in brief, haunted intervals. Bailey dreamed of marching endlessly through fields of rubble, always searching for something just out of reach. He awoke to the sound of Hero's coughing, and for a long moment he felt the full weight of their isolation. He was just one man, cut off from his unit, protecting a child he barely knew in a war neither of them could control. As dawn approached, Bailey knew the moment of decision had arrived. He prepared Hero for what might come, smoothing the boy's hair and pressing the wooden bird into his hand. Bailey tried to communicate, using gestures and gentle words, that they might soon meet other Americans. Hero nodded solemnly, trusting Bailey completely. With a last look around the empty farmhouse, Bailey lifted Hero onto his back and stepped into the pale morning light, ready to risk everything for the boy's future. Bailey and Hero emerged from the battered farmhouse at dawn, the world around them washed clean by last night's storm, but still haunted by the scars of battle. Every step toward the main road was a test of courage and hope. Bailey kept Hero close, scanning the horizon for any movement. They passed abandoned gardens and collapsed walls, moving steadily toward the place where Bailey had last seen American patrols. The soldier's heart pounded in his chest, fear and determination in equal measure. He rehearsed what he would say, bracing himself for any reaction. As they approached a crossroads littered with debris, Bailey saw the glint of metal, American helmets, just visible through the fog. He lifted his free hand and called out, keeping his body between Hero and the soldiers. Shouts rang out, and several men appeared, rifles raised in confusion. Bailey raised his voice, explaining in urgent English that the boy was alone, separated from his family, and needed help. The soldiers hesitated, uncertain, but Bailey's tone left little room for doubt. They lowered their weapons and approached, studying the pair with wary curiosity. One of the soldiers recognized Bailey and quickly vouched for him. The tension in the air eased a little, and the Americans listened as Bailey described how he had found Hero, how they had survived together, and how he believed the boy's family might still be searching for him. A medic came forward, checking Hero for injuries and offering him water and food. Hero stared wide-eyed at the newcomers, clutching the wooden bird as if it were a talisman against the unknown. Bailey stayed at his side, reassuring him with a quiet hand on his shoulder. The Americans discussed what to do next. They agreed to help search for Hero's family, and soon a message was relayed to nearby villagers and to any Japanese civilians who had begun returning to the outskirts of the area. Bailey felt a weight lift from his chest. At last, there was hope that Hero would be reunited with those who loved him. The boy clung to Bailey as they were taken to a temporary shelter,
still uncertain but no longer alone.
That afternoon, word spread through the local survivors that an American soldier had been found with a Japanese child. Against all odds, Hiro's mother, Yuki, arrived at the camp, her face streaked with tears and disbelief. She called her son's name, voice cracking, and Hiro's eyes filled with recognition. The reunion was tentative at first. Years of fear and propaganda did not dissolve instantly. But when Hiro ran to his mother and she gathered him into her arms, all doubts vanished. Bailey watched the scene with quiet relief, a lump in his throat. For a while, Bailey and Yuki could only bow to each other, their gratitude and respect expressed in gestures rather than words. Hiro, exhausted, nestled between them, the carved wooden bird still gripped in his hand. The story of their ordeal spread quickly among the villagers and soldiers alike. People began to view Bailey with a new kind of respect, seeing in him not just an enemy, but a human being who had chosen compassion over cruelty.
In the weeks that followed, as the fighting receded and life slowly returned to the ruined landscape, Hiro's story became part of local memory. Yuki told her neighbors about the American soldier who had risked everything to keep her son alive. Bailey remained in Okinawa for a short time longer, helping with relief efforts and assisting displaced families. Before he left, Yuki found him and pressed the wooden bird back into his hand, a symbol of their shared experience and the fragile trust that had grown between them. When Bailey finally returned home, he carried the memory of those days with him. He kept the wooden bird on his bedside table, a reminder that even in war, kindness could survive. Hiro, too, carried those memories into adulthood. The story of the soldier who protected him during the darkest days of his life was retold each year, passed down to his own children and grandchildren. And in a village once defined by fear, there remained a quiet monument to the day when enemies became something more. When, for a few precious days, a soldier's courage and a child's trust proved stronger than war itself.